take you to the broadcast of It's Time with Reverend Nathaniel W. Martin. Here's Reverend Martin.
Thank you, Dr. Blackwell. Let me say hotep, abaragani to my Africana Studies colleagues and contemporaries, students, pupils, scholars, researchers, and learners, as well as our academics and academes. And also let me say good morning, because I don't know what time you'll be looking at this. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, but certainly never good night and never ever goodbye, because I find goodbyes traumatizing. I said I find goodbyes traumatizing. My name is the Reverend Nathaniel W. Martin. I'm the pastor of the New Life Institutional Baptist Church here in the city of Los Angeles. We're located at 8916 South Main Street. That's the New Life Institutional Baptist Church located at 8916 South Main Street here in the city of Los Angeles. Can't go by Google because they still locked in and obsessed with that other piece of property that we owned for so long, and according to them we have died. But of course I can tell you we didn't die, and we're still going on. I guess Google is like when the Social Security say you dead, even though you got your Social Security card and you standing in front of them. But anyway, be that as it may, we are located at 8916 South Main. We still having service. We haven't missed having a service ever. And so we thank God for our survival and our continuation. And we ask your prayers humbly upon us. We're being hosted by the Shiloh Missionary Christian Church, which is pastored by my good friend, the Reverend Dr. Della F. Hollinas. And I want you to keep Dr. Hollinas lifted up in prayer. She was at a prayer meeting Wednesday night. She's doing better, and her mind is alert, and her faith is strong. And we're just praying that God would continue to heal her and allow her to come out and give leadership. All right? The offering which you are viewing at this present time is entitled It's Time, and naturally time is a broad subject, as our English teachers taught us in school. And as if that wasn't enough, we also focus in on the social justice part of that time. And so we have two broad subjects: time, which is the mental presupposition of the duration of an object, among other things. That's just one definition. And then we have social justice, which is the equality of the people among themselves as they interact with their government. Social justice. You got to be treated right and equitably and equally in order to have social justice. And we have been striving for that since I was a child, and we haven't got there yet. We also believe in reparations for past injuries from slavery on up to now. Yes, not just slavery, but the 100 years of Jim Crow segregation and the detrimental strategies and tactics that were enacted against black people that kept us from prospering as others prospered. And we demand that reparations be paid, and we applaud the California Reparations Commission for their work. And even though they kind of excluded me, but hey, it's good to see something being done. And so this California Reparations Commission is the first in the nation to actually study the effects of slavery and how to compensate the descendants of the formerly enslaved. And so we thank God for their work. I think their chairperson is Mrs. Camilla Moore. and Steve Bradford and Reggie Jones Sawyer have also on that committee, and they have done quite a job. They even had Dr. Sandy Darity and Dr. Greg Carr, among other experts, to come and give them valuable expertise as they try to do their important work. And so consequently, they have narrowed it down to reparations for African descendants who were here from the 1800s, which was the height of slavery in this nation. And for those of you that don't know it, California could easily have become a slave state, or come into the Union as a slave state, but by the remonstrances and the speech making of J.C. Fremont, mostly his wife, and a Reverend King of that era, California came in as a free state. And but it was very touch and go, because the southern part of California, which is where I am, they wanted to go with the Confederate states. The northern parts, they wanted to stay with the Union. And so you can see how iffy that was in the translation, because it was big money to be made in slavery. You can't deny that. The fortune of this country came from slavery, from the sale, the trading, and the labor, and the mental, intellectual property of the formerly enslaved. And so America owes a great debt that it needs to atone for, as Randall Robinson said in that book of his entitled The Debt. Needs to make whole the people whom they kidnapped from their lands, who they kidnapped from their country, who kidnapped from their society, from their civilization, and secreted them, or chained them rather, in the holes of dank and dark slave ships, and spirited those people through the Middle Passage over here to labor for nothing, for free, up until the end of the Civil War. Remember, when people, even at the end of the Civil War, some formerly enslaved people still didn't know that the war had been won and that the Union had prevailed, and they did not know that the Emancipation Proclamation had been signed in January 1, 1863. And so that was a turning point. That was as Joe Biden says, an inflection point. I kind of cringe when I say that. But that it was, and although we did not really become what we call free until 100 years later, as Dr. King said in 1963 at the Lincoln Memorial in that great speech he gave. We have been inching along, and the Reparations Commission has heightened some of the very facts which we stress every week in our broadcast, how that the environment and its impact upon us has been very detrimental. And it's not just a matter of us atoning for what we have done as a species to the earth, but also that we come to find that 75% of black people are more likely to live in hazardous areas, and so that affects your health, that harms your health, both short term and long term. And so the Reparations Commission has single that out, that the environment in which we were forced, remember we weren't allowed to live in the suburbs. We could work there, but we couldn't live in Lakewood. You could work in Inglewood, but you better not let the sun catch you over here. So we weren't allowed to come to the suburbs until roughly 1964. Well, really not until 1968, when they finally passed the Fair Housing Act following the assassination of Dr. Martin Luther King, when Lyndon Baines Johnson was able to use his leverage to force the recalcitrant Congress to pass an equal FHA law. In other words, that it had not ever been equal, because, like I said, you couldn't come to live in Inglewood because they wouldn't let you. And what I mean the powers that be, which represented the banks, the financing system, the real estate people, the insurance people, and state law. So we could live in Nickerson Gardens, we could live in Pueblo del Rio, we could live in Jordan Downs, Hawaiian Gardens, and other places like that, but we could not live where we wanted to live. And so that was always a factor, a thorn, which I'm grateful that the Reparations Commission took that into account, and not only the slavery, because it's going to be hard to get slavery to pass before the Supreme Court when the appeals and the suits began to be made certiorari in the U.S. Supreme Court. The first thing John Roberts and Clarence Thomas are going to scream, oh, it's race-based, and you can't have race-based nothings in this country. How odd, how ironic that those who benefited the most and for centuries screamed and objected to the progress on the Negro on the basis of race, now hold that same canard up before the people and tell us you've been harmed, but it was race that harmed you, but you cannot use race as a factor to undo that harm. And so you can see how hard and difficult it is going to be. So rather than be faced with the black only, which it really should be, the Reparations Commission is going to down the path of lineage. You have to be able to prove that somebody in your family was in slavery or was a slave in order to apply and avail yourself of the reparations. And let me read some more of what they said, that all right, blacks were forced into under-resourced areas, contributing to health harm, and 1%, only 1% of FHA loans from 1946, which was at the end of the Second World War, to 1960, which a lot of us call the modern civil rights movement. Only 1% of the FHA loans, you hear me, 1%. That means that 99% of the FHA loans went to the people who were so-called white, but only 1% of those same FHA loans, which were backed by the taxpayers' money, your grandparents and great-grandparents and my great-great-great-grandparents paid the taxes, but they were not unable to buy into those suburbs. So the suburbs were for the so-called people who were white, and the Nickerson Gardens and the Cabrini Greens all across this nation were the lot of those who Dr. King called the less favored. It's peasants from Africa, as he said in the speech. And so you can see the unjustness or the injustice which demands that the nation as a whole rectify that. Property was taken unjustly by eminent domain, and that means that the government, the city hall or the county or the state or the federal government could take a person's property for what they call public improvement, which was the case at Bruce's Beach, and which is down in Manhattan Beach, and they took those people, the Bruce family's property, because they didn't want any colored people, or Negroes as we were called at that time, to be in that area or to have a successful business in that area. And so the city council, the Chamber of Commerce condemned that property and forced the Bruce family out of that lucrative, expensive property. Property paid cost $1,200 at that time. That was a lot of money, and they had worked very hard to get it, and they bought that property legally. But the government, with baked-in, systematized racism, was able to take their property, and they did not get that property back. The descendants of the Bruce family were recently, really, in fact, this year, that property was returned to them, and with certain stipulations and guarantees from the county, so that they would not lose their property again because they couldn't pay the taxes. So the county is leasing their property, but they are paying the Bruce family, in other words, for that piece of land. I digress. The devaluation of black businesses and the unjust property takings by eminent domain, and plus the housing discrimination, because in California and indeed all across this country, they had what you call racially restrictive covenant. That means that since only white people were able to buy into the suburb to get the American dream, it was a stipulation in the racially restrictive covenant, which they had to sign in applying for the loan, that they would not sell that house to a Negro. They would not lease it, they would not rent it, and all of that it encumbered. And no Negro could live on the property. There was not a maid or a butler or a chauffeur or somebody like that. And so that was how the restricted covenants worked, and it worked very well, very well. All across the nation, they put in racial restrictive covenants. And yes, it was government sanctioned. It was in order to get a federal loan, there could not be any Negroes in that area. And that was by law. In other words, de jure, not de facto, which is bad enough, but codified in law, in the canon. And so America has to adequately make whole the families of the descendants of those, families who suffered that redlining, as well as those who suffered slavery as well, because the effects of slavery are yet with us at this very hour, and until we have a reckoning, John Conyers put forward H.R. 40, way back there when he was in the Congress, which was a bill to study the effects of slavery. It has never passed. It never passed. It didn't pass under Richard Nixon. It didn't pass under Ronald Reagan. It didn't pass under Jimmy Carter. It didn't pass under Barack Obama. And it certainly didn't pass under Donald John Trump. But it is still out there. And I think the Congress has recently undertaken the John Conyers bill under another name. And I know Representative Sheila Jackson Lee from Texas is a proud supporter and sponsor of H.R. 40, which is to study the effects of slavery. How did it affect the descendants of the enslaved, and how did it affect the white population who were the enslavers? But yet you can't even get a study in Congress on those types of issues. And so they're finally under Joe Biden and as President of the United States, and here in the state of California under Gavin Newsom, we're finally getting a crack in the door that says maybe reparations can be paid, but it's going to take a long time. It's going to have to really be cut down and itemized and all of that type of thing. And so we got to keep faith, keep prayer, be prayerful, because it's going to happen. It may not happen, like I said, in my lifetime, but it's going to happen because it is a necessary bridge that must be crossed. It is an atonement that must be made. It is an accounting that must be given. It is a reckoning that is going to be, that is unavoidable if this nation is going to live out to the true meaning of its creed. Now, even under this, which they have not set an amount, but they're throwing around like figures like $223,000 or $350,000 per black person. You help me. And I don't include other people in our suffering, because when we suffer, we suffer. And you can have all those other people at the table now, but those other people did not go through what we went through, and that needs to be signified. And you know who I'm talking about, all that LGBTQ and I people, and all these people of color, which I'm not a person of color, I'm a black man. They call me viler names than black. When they called me black, we turned that into a blessing and started singing, yes, I'm black and I'm proud. But of course, when I was a child, if you call somebody black, you had a fight on your hands. Just like if you call somebody the N-word, which we don't use. When I was growing up, the N-word, you know what it was because they told you what it was and its application. But now, in our more genteel ways, following the counsel of Lee Atwater, they don't call you that no more. They talk about taxes, and they talk about property values and other things, which mean the same thing, because the effect on the black people is that we get hurt the worst. It's like in COVID-19, we got hurt the worst. When nobody could work, we got hurt the worst. When the housing recession started back then in 2007, we got hurt the worst. That's always, and that's by design. That's a systemic thing. There's no accident or mystery behind it. When you're the bottom person and everybody else above you is on top of you, well, then you always gonna get hurt worse. And you know, Ronald Reagan deceived the country, talking about riches was going to trickle down. Riches don't trickle down. Riches trickle up. All right, my last 5 minutes. Let me recite in your hearing our reparations text, which is taken from Deuteronomy chapter 15, picking up the reading at verse 12. It says in part, "And if thy brother, an Hebrew man, or an Hebrew woman, be sold unto thee and serve thee 6 years, then in the 7th year thou shalt let them go out free from thee. And when thou sendest them out free from thee, thou shalt not let them go away empty, but thou shalt furnish them liberally out of thy flock, and out of thy floor, and out of thy winepress." The flock, you know, from the sheep and the geese and the turkeys and the chickens and the sheep. I said sheep already, but that was your flock. And the floor was, of course, your grains, your barley and your wheat and your corn and all of those type of things. Even down to figs. You were to furnish them liberally out of thy flock and out of thy floor and out of thy winepress. Because in those days and age, and still in these days and age, even though we have a higher level of alcohol in our so-called wine, but you were not to deprive those people of the medicinal help that wine could provide. Wine and oil was considered a medicinal help in healing. And so when God had to look out for the less fortunate, he made sure that those who were more fortunate helped those who were less fortunate. In other words, there was an even exchange. Those people had worked 6 years, had worked like a dog, worked like a slave, but now it was time for them to resume their status, which was not what happened in U.S. slavery. In U.S. slavery, you started out as a slave, and that was your status while you lived, and that was your status when you died. And so you can see the difference in the dichotomy, the difference in the status. And so if you had children, your children were slaves, and their children were slaves, and their great-grandchildren. As far as the eye could see, that's all everybody was going to be, was a slave. And so, my brothers and my sisters, as I wrap up here, we thank God for the Reparations Commission here in the state of California, and we trust that you will keep up your prayers and keep the faith, and thank God for the unions. The union in New York City went out for a one-day strike this week for higher pay, and the railroad workers have been restrained from going out on strike by the federal government for a while, but they're still going to have to get those sick days corrected. Remember, if you're working on a job and they don't want to pay you, take my advice, start while you're young, get away from there, and don't work for them. Thank you, Doc. We out of here. Love you.